The road stretched endlessly into the darkness, its faint glimmer reflecting the cold glow of the crescent moon. Elon Musk gripped the wheel of his rented SUV, his thoughts as restless as the winding highway ahead. The past few weeks had been a blur of high-stakes negotiations, relentless media attention, and the unyielding weight of expectations. For the world, he was a visionary, a man capable of reshaping the future. For himself, he was simply a father, carrying the scars of a past he couldn't outrun. The glowing neon sign came into view like a beacon in the void. Evelyn's Diner, it read, its flickering letters casting faint shadows onto the gravel parking lot. He pulled into the lot, cut the engine, and sat still for a moment, the ticking of the cooling engine filling the silence. It had been years since he'd stepped into a place like this. Years since he had let himself feel the simplicity of anonymity. Tonight, he craved that simplicity more than anything. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered, the smell of frying bacon and old coffee immediately filling his senses. The interior was an ode to nostalgia, red vinyl booths, a scratched countertop, and walls cluttered with faded photographs and handwritten specials on chalkboards. A jukebox in the corner hummed with the first notes of Patsy Cline's Crazy. Elon glanced around, noting the mix of patrons. A trucker sat hunched over a slice of pie, a young couple shared fries, and a mother tried to wrangle her toddler into eating peas. Here, life played out in the small, unremarkable ways he once took for granted. He adjusted the hood of his sweatshirt, pulling it lower as he moved toward a booth in the far corner, hoping to blend into the scenery. The waitress arrived a few minutes later, balancing a tired smile and a notepad. She looked to be in her 50s, her hair held back in a no-nonsense bun, her hands calloused but steady. "What can I get you tonight, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice as warm as the diner itself. "Coffee," Elon replied, his tone soft, barely audible over the clatter of plates. "And whatever the special is, meat loaf and mash," she said, jotting it down. "It's not fancy, but it'll fill you up." "That's fine," he said, offering a fleeting smile. As she walked away, Elon leaned back, his eyes drifting toward the window. The vast emptiness of the road mirrored the ache inside him. His mind, despite his best efforts, circled back to Claire. It had been 5 years since she vanished. 5 years of sleepless nights replaying their last conversation. He could still see her face twisted in frustration, hear her voice trembling as she accused him of being too absorbed in his work to notice what was happening in her life. "I'm done trying to make you care, Dad," she had said before slamming the door. The memory always stopped there, as if his mind couldn't bear to venture further. Her disappearance had been a slow unraveling, a single thread pulled until his entire world came apart. The police had their theories, the media had their headlines, but he had only questions. The arrival of his coffee snapped him back to the present. He wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into his skin. From across the room, the door jingled again, admitting a young waitress with smooth, dark skin and a bounce in her step. She weaved through the tables, her earrings catching the light in quick flashes as she greeted regulars. Something about her presence stirred an unease in him, a flicker of recognition he couldn't place. He shook his head, brushing it off as the byproduct of an overactive, grief-stricken mind. Outside, a semi-truck rumbled by, its headlights illuminating the rain-speckled glass for a fleeting moment. Elon took a sip of his coffee, the bitterness grounding him, unaware that the faint shimmer of the waitress's earrings was about to pull him into a mystery he hadn't dared to imagine. Elon barely registered the arrival of his food, the clatter of the plate on the table pulling him from his thoughts. The waitress, with a kind smile, set down the steaming dish of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans before giving a perfunctory nod and moving on. He muttered a polite "thank you," though his attention had already shifted to the young waitress he had noticed earlier. She moved with a quiet efficiency, balancing plates with ease, her face framed by tightly coiled braids that bounced as she walked. Her energy contrasted sharply with the weariness of the late-night crowd. Elon wouldn't have paid her much more attention if it hadn't been for the subtle glint of light that drew his eye. A small earring dangling from her left ear. It was a simple design, a delicate teardrop studded with tiny, sparkling stones. But to Elon, it might as well have been a lightning strike. His heart stuttered, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't just any earring. It was the earring. Years ago, he had given Claire that very pair on her 16th birthday. They were unique, custom-made by a jeweler in Los Angeles. Small enough to be elegant, but striking enough to match her fiery personality. He could still remember her excitement when she opened the box, her laughter as she hugged him tightly and said, "These are perfect, Dad. Absolutely perfect." The thought alone was enough to make his chest tighten, but seeing one of them now, dangling from a stranger's ear, sent his mind racing. He tried to brush it off, convincing himself it was a coincidence. After all, jewelry wasn't singular. Designs could be replicated, mistakes could happen. And yet, as he watched her move to a table across the room, the unease grew. The light hit the earring again, a sharp gleam that seemed almost accusatory. Unable to stop himself, Elon leaned forward, his elbows on the table. He studied the waitress, his eyes narrowing. She seemed unaware of his scrutiny as she took an order from a pair of truckers, her polite smile unwavering. The earring caught the light again as she tucked a stray braid behind her ear. Could it really be the same one? The rational part of him pushed back against the thought. The world was vast, chaotic, full of coincidences. But the gnawing ache in his gut, the one that had kept him awake for years, now whispered that this wasn't a coincidence at all. The young woman turned toward the kitchen, passing his table. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. She offered a perfunctory smile, the kind given to every customer. Elon returned it weakly, but his attention was locked on the earring, his pulse quickening. His mind flooded with questions. Where had she gotten it? How long had she had it? Why here? In the middle of nowhere, the sense of recognition grew stronger, and so did the urgency to know more. The coffee in his cup was cold now, untouched, but Elon didn't notice. He waited, watching, his food forgotten, as the young waitress disappeared behind the swinging door to the kitchen. That earring, so small, so seemingly insignificant, was the thread that might lead him to unravel the mystery of his daughter's disappearance. And he wasn't leaving this diner until he pulled it. Elon sat frozen in his booth, the noise of the diner fading to a dull hum in the background. The young waitress emerged from the kitchen, a tray of drinks balanced in one hand. Her movements were unhurried, practiced, but Elon's focus on her was anything but casual. He hadn't been this close to a tangible connection to Claire in years, and his instincts screamed at him to act. But how? A man like him, known worldwide, couldn't simply stand up and demand answers without causing a scene. He needed to be careful. If this woman had anything to do with Claire, frightening her might sever the only lead he'd found in 5 agonizing years. As she passed by his table again, Elon cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but firm. The waitress turned, a polite smile masking mild curiosity. "Yes, sir. Did you need something?" Now that she was standing in front of him, the earring was impossible to ignore. Its subtle shimmer seemed to mock him, daring him to ask the question he wasn't sure how to phrase. He stumbled for a moment, uncharacteristically unsure of himself. He gestured to his now cold plate of food. "Could I get this reheated?" Got a little distracted. Her smile didn't waver, though she tilted her head slightly, likely accustomed to the quirks of tired travelers. "Of course, sir. One moment." She reached for the plate, her movement smooth, the earring swaying gently. Before she could leave, Elon spoke again. "That's a beautiful earring you're wearing," he said, forcing a casual tone. "Is it special?" The question caught her off guard, and she paused, her brow furrowing slightly. Her hand instinctively went to the earring, her fingertips brushing the teardrop as if to confirm it was still there. "Oh, this," she said, her tone light but hesitant. "Thanks. I've had it for a few years now." "Really?" Elon leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "If you don't mind me asking, where'd you get it?" The hesitation deepened, her polite demeanor giving way to something more guarded. She glanced around the diner as if searching for an escape route, then back at Elon. I bought it at a thrift store," she said, her voice quieter now. "Here in town." "Why?" Elon's heart raced. The answer was plausible, but her body language told a different story. She shifted her weight, her gaze darting to the kitchen as though she were eager to leave. It looks identical to a pair I gave someone," Elon said, carefully choosing his words. "Someone very important to me." She swallowed hard, her discomfort evident. "Oh, well, I wouldn't know about that," she said quickly. "It was just in a display case at the store. I thought it was pretty, so I got it." Her explanation was smooth, but her eyes betrayed her. Elon had spent years reading people, partners, rivals, journalists. He recognized the flicker of unease in her expression, the telltale signs of someone withholding the truth. "Do you remember which store?" he pressed gently, leaning back to ease the tension. She hesitated again, then nodded. "Yeah, it's just a little place downtown. Jack's Thrift and Treasures." She offered a strained smile. "They get a lot of random stuff. You might find something like it there." Her answer seemed rehearsed, as if she'd anticipated questions about the earring before. Elon's mind raced, weighing the possibilities. Could she be lying? Or was she merely nervous under the scrutiny of a stranger? "Thank you," he said finally, allowing her to retreat. "And sorry for holding you up." She nodded quickly and hurried toward the kitchen with his plate. Elon's eyes followed her, the sense of unease growing stronger. Something didn't add up. Her reaction wasn't just nerves. It was deeper, more personal. As the door swung shut behind her, Elon exhaled, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The earring was Claire's. He was sure of it now. And the young woman, whoever she was, knew more than she was letting on. Elon waited, his mind a tempest of questions and memories. The young waitress hadn't returned yet, and he couldn't decide if that was due to the rush of orders in the kitchen or because she was deliberately avoiding him. Either way, the earring burned in his thoughts, pulling him back to the last night he saw Claire. The memory was sharp and vivid, like a photograph etched into his mind. The argument had started over something small, something ridiculous. A missed piano recital, a project launch that had kept him tied up for weeks. Claire had called him out, her voice trembling with frustration, accusing him of caring more about his work than his family. "You think a nice house and expensive gifts make up for you not being here," she had shouted, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't even see me, Dad. You don't even know me anymore." Elon had tried to respond, tried to explain that everything he did was for her, for their future. But the words had come out wrong, cold and clinical, like an engineer explaining a blueprint rather than a father reaching out to his daughter. "I'm done trying to make you care, Dad," she had said, her voice breaking. "I'm done." And then she was gone. Hours later, a single text had arrived. "Don't come looking for me. I need to figure out who I am without you." No follow-up, no clues, just silence. The police had tried, of course, but with no evidence of foul play. Their hands were tied. The media had spun its theories: runaway heiress, rebellious teen, abduction, but none of it brought Claire back. Elon stared into his untouched coffee, his jaw tightening. That earring was more than a clue. It was a piece of Claire's life that had somehow resurfaced in the hands of a stranger. And it meant she was out there somewhere. The sound of the door swinging open pulled him back to the present. The young waitress emerged, her expression guarded, as she carried his reheated plate to the table. She set it down without meeting his eyes, her hand brushing the edge of the table. "I hope this is better," she said quickly, her tone neutral. Elon seized the moment. "It's fine. Thank you," he said, pausing. "I didn't catch your name earlier." She hesitated, then sighed softly. "Lisa." "Lisa," he repeated, leaning forward slightly. "Listen, I need to be honest with you. That earring you're wearing, it belonged to my daughter. She's been missing for 5 years." Her eyes widened, her hand instinctively going to the earring again. What? No. That can't be right. I've had this for years. I told you, I got it at a thrift shop. I believe you, Elon said gently, though he wasn't sure if he did. But it's not a coincidence. That earring was custom made. There's no way it just ended up there by chance. Lisa's brows furrowed, and she looked away, her lips pressing into a thin line. I don't know what to tell you, she murmured. I've had it for a long time. I never thought much about it. Elon's voice softened. I'm not accusing you of anything. I need to know if there's more to the story. Anything at all. She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with her apron. Finally, she sighed. I got it at Jack's, like I said. A guy named Marvin brought it in. He sells a lot of stuff there. That's all I know. Marvin, Elon repeated, the name unfamiliar. Do you know anything else about him? Lisa shook her head. Not much. He's sketchy, you know? Comes around every now and then with boxes of junk. Jack doesn't ask questions, and neither do I. Elon's chest tightened, the first spark of hope battling with his apprehension. Lisa, he said, his tone urgent but calm. I know you don't owe me anything, but if you could help me track him down, it could mean everything to me. She stared at him, her expression torn. I don't want any trouble, she said finally. There won't be, Elon promised. I just need to talk to him. Please. Lisa's shoulders slumped, and she nodded reluctantly. Okay. Marvin usually hangs out at a bar a few miles from here, Hattie's. If he's not there, someone will know where to find him. Thank you, Elon said, relief washing over him. But as Lisa turned to walk away, the weight of her hesitation lingered. Something told him she knew more than she was letting on, and that this was only the beginning of the answers he was about to uncover. The air outside the diner was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked asphalt. Elon stood by his SUV, his phone gripped tightly in one hand as he debated his next move. The name Marvin echoed in his mind, stirring a mix of anticipation and dread. If this man truly had answers, then tracking him down could be the key to finding Claire. But why did the mention of Marvin seem to unsettle Lisa so deeply? Lisa emerged from the diner a few minutes later, her apron tucked under her arm, signaling the end of her shift. She spotted Elon lingering by his car and hesitated, then approached cautiously. You're really serious about this, aren't you? She asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. More than you can imagine, Elon replied, his gaze steady. If there's even a chance Marvin knows something, I have to find him. Lisa shifted on her feet, chewing her lip. Look, I told you what I know, but there's something about this that doesn't sit right with me. She glanced around the empty parking lot before lowering her voice. That earring, it's always felt out of place, you know? Like it didn't belong with the rest of the junk Marvin brought in. I even asked him about it once, but he just shrugged me off, said I was overthinking it. Elon's pulse quickened. Did he ever say where he got it? No, Lisa said, shaking her head. But now that I think about it, Marvin never talks about where his stuff comes from. Jack doesn't push him on it, either. He just pays him and resells whatever he can. Elon studied her, noticing the faint tremor in her hands as she gripped the strap of her bag. She wasn't just uneasy, she was scared. You don't trust him, Elon said, more a statement than a question. Lisa hesitated, then let out a shaky laugh. Trust? No. Marvin's bad news. Everyone around here knows that. But he's not the kind of guy you cross, you know? He's got a temper. And connections. Elon frowned. Connections. She nodded, glancing toward the road as if expecting someone to appear. Rumors, mostly. People say he's mixed up in all kinds of shady stuff. Stolen goods, drugs, even worse. But no one's ever proven anything. He keeps a low profile, but if you've lived around here long enough, you hear things. The weight of her words settled heavily between them. Elon knew the risk he was about to take, but the thought of Claire, the possibility of finding her, dwarfed any fear of Marvin. Lisa, he said carefully, I understand if you're worried, but I need your help. You said he goes to Hattie's. Can you come with me? Point him out. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. No way. I told you what I know, and that's already more than I should have. If Marvin finds out, he won't. Elon interrupted, his tone firm but calm. I'll make sure of it. And if he does, I'll take responsibility. You won't be involved. Lisa hesitated, her internal conflict playing out in her expression. Finally, she sighed, rubbing her temples. I can't believe I'm even considering this, she muttered. Elon waited, saying nothing, sensing that pressuring her further would only push her away. After a long pause, she looked up at him, her resolve wavering but present. All right, I'll go. But if this goes south, I'm out. No questions asked. Got it. Got it, Elon said, his relief palpable. Lisa glanced toward the dark horizon, where the road seemed to stretch endlessly. Hattie's is about 10 minutes from here. I'll ride with you. I'm not walking into that place alone. Elon nodded, unlocking the passenger door. As Lisa climbed in, she cast him a wary glance. For the record, I think you're crazy for doing this, but I guess I get it. If I were you, I'd probably be doing the same thing. He didn't respond immediately, starting the engine and pulling onto the road. The faint hum of the tires filled the silence between them. Thank you, he said eventually, his voice quiet but sincere. Lisa didn't reply, but the look in her eyes said she understood. The SUV rolled to stop outside Hattie's bar, its faded sign glowing weakly in the dim yellow light of a street lamp. The building was a relic from another era, its peeling paint and crooked windows a testament to years of neglect. A few motorcycles were parked haphazardly along the gravel lot, their chrome glinting under the moonlight. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers nervously toying with the strap of her bag. This is it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. If Marvin's not here, someone inside will know where to find him. Elon studied the building, his jaw tight. The bar's grimy exterior and the muffled sounds of raucous laughter from within hinted at the kind of place most people avoided. But Elon wasn't most people. He had to see this through, no matter the cost. Stay close to me, he said, glancing at Lisa. If you want to leave at any point, just say the word. She nodded, but didn't move to unbuckle her seatbelt. You're really not afraid, are you? I'm terrified, Elon admitted, surprising her with his honesty. But fear won't stop me from finding Claire. Lisa exhaled slowly, then unbuckled her seatbelt. All right, let's get this over with. They stepped out of the car and approached the entrance, the scent of stale beer and cigarette smoke growing stronger with each step. Inside, the bar was dimly lit, its walls adorned with faded posters and neon signs advertising cheap liquor. The crowd was a mix of bikers, drifters, and locals nursing their drinks in solitude. Lisa scanned the room quickly, then leaned toward Elon. There, she murmured, nodding toward a man at the far end of the bar. Marvin. He was in his late 40s, his rough appearance matching Lisa's description, unshaven, with a wiry build and a face that looked like it had seen its fair share of fights. He sat hunched over the counter, a cigarette dangling from his lips and a glass of something amber in front of him. Elon squared his shoulders, his heart pounding as he crossed the room. Lisa hesitated, then followed a step behind, her eyes darting nervously around the bar. Marvin looked up as they approached, his gaze narrowing as he sized them up. Can I help you? He asked, his voice low and gravelly. Elon didn't waste time. Marvin, right? The man frowned, his hand hovering over his cigarette. Who's asking? Elon, he said simply, then gestured toward the earring Lisa was wearing. We need to talk about that. Marvin's eyes flicked to Lisa, then back to Elon. He exhaled a puff of smoke, his expression hardening. What about it? It belonged to my daughter, Elon said, his voice steady. She's been missing for 5 years. I need to know where you got it. Marvin's jaw tightened, and he leaned back, crossing his arms. Don't know what you're talking about. I sell a lot of stuff. People bring me things. I move them along. End of story. It's not the end of the story, Elon said, his tone sharpening. That earring isn't just stuff. It's one of a kind, and you know it. Marvin's gaze darted to Lisa, who shifted uneasily. Look, man, I don't keep records of every little trinket I handle. If you're looking for someone, try the cops. The cops didn't find her, Elon snapped. But you're going to tell me everything you know about that earring. Now, the tension between them was palpable, drawing the attention of nearby patrons. Marvin scowled, his fingers drumming against the counter. Fine, he muttered after a long silence. I found it. In a house. Lisa blinked. What house? Marvin hesitated, then shrugged. An old place out by the woods. Nobody lives there anymore. I go through it sometimes. See what's left behind. Found that earring in a box of junk. Elon's pulse quickened. What else was in the box? Nothing important. Just random crap, Marvin said dismissively, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Take me there, Elon demanded. Marvin shook his head, leaning forward. Listen, I don't know who you are or what you're after, but I don't get involved in people's business. You want the address? Fine, but you're on your own. Elon stared at him, his resolve unshaken. Give me the address. Marvin scribbled it on a napkin and slid it across the counter. But if I were you, I'd leave it alone. That place. It's bad news. Elon snatched the napkin, his jaw tightening as he glanced at the scrawled address. Thanks for the advice, he said coldly, then turned to Lisa. Let's go. Lisa hesitated, her eyes flicking between Marvin and Elon. I'm coming with you, she said finally, her voice firm despite the fear in her expression. Elon nodded, grateful for her courage. Together, they left the bar, the address in hand, and the mystery of Claire one step closer to unraveling. Elon gripped the wheel tightly as the SUV rumbled down a narrow, unpaved road. The address Marvin had scrawled on the napkin led them deep into the outskirts of the town, where streetlights gave way to dense woods and isolation. Beside him, Lisa sat in tense silence, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her bag. The earlier confrontation with Marvin still lingered between them, heavy with unspoken fears. Do you think he was telling the truth? Lisa finally asked, breaking the quiet. Elon's eyes stayed on the road. He knew something, he said, his voice low. He was nervous. People don't get nervous over junk. Lisa let out a shaky breath, her gaze drifting to the passing trees. This doesn't feel real, she murmured. It's like something out of a movie. You, me, and some sketchy guy sending us to a house in the middle of nowhere. Elon glanced at her briefly, his expression softening. You didn't have to come. I know, she replied quickly. But I need to see this through. If I can help, even a little, then it's worth it. The road came to an abrupt end, and Elon pulled the SUV into a clearing. Ahead of them stood the house Marvin had described, an old, weathered structure that seemed to sag under its own weight. The windows were boarded up, and the front porch was littered with debris. It looked like no one had set foot there in years. This is it, Elon said, shutting off the engine. Lisa hesitated before stepping out, her eyes scanning the area nervously. You think she could have been here? Elon didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to voice the thought that had taken root in his mind, that this place could hold more than answers. It could hold the truth he had been dreading for years. They approached the house cautiously, their footsteps crunching on the overgrown grass. The front door hung slightly ajar, creaking on its hinges as Elon pushed it open. The air inside was heavy, stale with the smell of mildew and decay. The living room was a wreck, with overturned furniture and broken glass scattered across the floor. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and the faint remnants of graffiti marked the surfaces. It was clear this house had been abandoned for a long time, but there were signs that someone had been here more recently. An empty bottle of water on the floor, a tattered blanket draped over a chair, and footprints in the dust. Lisa stepped closer to one of the footprints, her brow furrowing. These aren't old, she said softly. Elon's heart raced as he scanned the room, his eyes searching for anything that might connect this place to Claire. They moved deeper into the house, their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. The kitchen was a mess of rusted appliances and broken cabinets, but it was the dining room that stopped them both in their tracks. On the table, Partially buried under a pile of papers and debris was a small, battered photo frame. Elon's breath caught as he lifted it, wiping away the grime to reveal a picture of Claire. It was one he hadn't seen before. She looked older, her expression guarded, but unmistakably her. She was here, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Lisa stared at the photo, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh my God, this is real," she said, her voice trembling. The sound of movement upstairs shattered the stillness. Both of them froze, their flashlights jerking toward the ceiling. The faint creak of floorboards echoed above them, followed by a heavy silence. "Someone's here," Lisa whispered, her voice tight with fear. Elon nodded, his pulse thundering in his ears. He placed the photo carefully on the table and gestured for Lisa to stay behind him as they moved toward the staircase. The steps groaned under their weight as they ascended, the air growing colder with each step. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before them, the doors to the rooms slightly ajar. Elon gripped the flashlight like a weapon, his hand steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "Hello," he called out, his voice firm but cautious. No response. They moved toward the first room, pushing the door open to reveal what looked like an old bedroom. The walls were bare, and the floor was littered with scraps of paper and empty cans. There was no sign of anyone. The next room was much the same, abandoned, empty, lifeless. But as they approached the final door at the end of the hallway, the faint sound of breathing reached their ears. Elon exchanged a tense glance with Lisa before pushing the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single, dirty window. A man sat hunched in the corner, his face obscured by the brim of a wide-brimmed hat. Elon's flashlight landed on him, and the man flinched, raising a hand to shield his face. "Who the hell are you?" the man growled, his voice raspy and defensive. Elon stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "I'm looking for my daughter. Her name is Claire. Where is she?" The man's eyes darted to the photo in Elon's hand, and his expression hardened. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his tone laced with warning. "I'm not leaving without answers," Elon said firmly. "Start talking." The man let out a low, bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You're digging into something you don't understand." Elon's jaw clenched. "Try me." The man in the corner remained silent for a long moment, the tension in the room so thick it seemed to suck the air out of the space. Lisa stood just behind Elon, her breathing shallow as she gripped the edge of the doorframe, her knuckles white. Elon stepped closer, his flashlight fixed on the stranger's face. The brim of the man's hat cast shadows that obscured his features, but his posture, rigid, defensive, spoke volumes. "I don't have time for games," Elon said, his voice low and controlled. "If you know anything about Claire, you're going to tell me. Now." The man finally raised his head, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. Fear, defiance, resignation. "You think you're the first one to come looking for answers in this place," he said, his voice rough, like gravel scraping metal. "You'll not." And most of them didn't like what they found. Elon's patience was razor thin. "I don't care about anyone else. I care about my daughter." He held up the photo. "She was here, wasn't she? Tell me the truth." The man's gaze flickered to the photo, his jaw tightening. "She was," he admitted finally, the words slow and heavy. Lisa let out a small gasp, and Elon's pulse surged, a mixture of relief and dread. "What happened to her?" Elon pressed. The man exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. "She was running from something, or someone. She didn't say much, but it was clear she didn't want to be found. She stayed here for a while, long enough for me to know she wasn't like the others who passed through." "The others?" Lisa asked, her voice quivering. "People come to this place when they've got nowhere else to go," the man said, glancing around the decrepit room as if the walls themselves carried the weight of countless stories. Claire was scared. She didn't say why, but she kept looking over her shoulder, like she was waiting for someone to catch up to her. Elon's hands tightened into fists. "Who was she running from?" The man shook his head, She never told me. But there was a man, someone who showed up looking for her. Tall, always wore a coat and hat. Said he was here to help her. Lisa stepped forward, her voice hesitant. Did she leave with him? The man hesitated, his fingers twitching as he considered his answer. I don't know. One day she was here, the next she wasn't. But that man, he came back after she was gone, tore through this place like he was looking for something. Elon's stomach churned. The image of Claire, scared and alone, fleeing from an unknown threat, was almost too much to bear. Why did you stay here? Elon asked, his tone edged with suspicion. The man smirked faintly, the expression bitter. This place has its uses. It's off the radar, and I don't like people asking questions. Same reason Claire came, I guess. Elon's mind raced as he pieced together the fragments of the story. Claire had been here, hiding, but something, or someone, had driven her away. And now, he had a new lead. The man in the coat and hat. Did she leave anything behind? Elon asked urgently. The man gestured toward the floorboards near the window. She hid things. There's a loose board over there. Might still be something there. Elon didn't wait. He crossed the room in quick strides, dropping to his knees and prying up the loose plank. Beneath it was a small, battered notebook. The cover was worn, and the pages inside were smudged with dirt. But as Elon flipped through it, his breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Claire's. Lisa knelt beside him, her eyes wide. Is it hers? Elon nodded, his fingers brushing over the inked words as though they might vanish if he wasn't careful. It's hers. He scanned the pages, the entries fragmented and cryptic. I can't stay here forever. I have to keep moving. The man in the hat found me again. I don't trust him, but I don't have a choice. I miss Dad. I wish I could call him, but it's too dangerous. The last entry was dated almost 2 years ago. If anyone finds this, please tell my dad I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted to be free. Elon closed the notebook, his chest tightening with a mixture of pain and resolve. Claire had been here. She had been alive. And now he had a new trail to follow. He looked at the man, his voice firm. This man in the coat. Do you know where I can find him? The man hesitated, then shook his head. He doesn't leave a trail. But if you're serious about finding her, you might want to check out a place called East Hollow. It's not far from here, and it's the kind of place someone like him would go. Why? Lisa asked, her brow furrowing. Because people disappear there, the man said grimly. The drive to East Hollow was tense, the atmosphere inside the SUV charged with unspoken thoughts. Elon gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles pale as he focused on the road ahead. Lisa sat silently beside him, clutching Claire's notebook as though it were a lifeline. The man's words back at the house lingered in the air like a ghost. People disappear there. East Hollow wasn't marked on the map. It wasn't even on the GPS. The man's vague directions led them deep into the woods, where the trees grew denser and the air colder. Eventually, they arrived at what could barely be called a road, a narrow, winding path carved into the earth by years of forgotten footsteps. This place doesn't feel right, Lisa muttered, breaking the silence. She glanced out the window, her unease growing with every passing moment. Elon didn't reply. His focus was unrelenting, his mind replaying the fragments of Claire's diary over and over. The man in the hat found me again. I don't trust him. The car slowed to stop as they reached the end of the path. Before them stood a crumbling structure, half hidden by overgrown vines and the encroaching forest. It wasn't a house. It looked more like an old hunting lodge, long abandoned and forgotten. This must be it, Elon said, stepping out of the car. Lisa followed reluctantly, clutching her coat tightly against the biting wind. Why would she come here? I don't know, Elon replied, his tone clipped. But we're going to find out. The lodge loomed before them, its broken windows and sagging roof giving it an eerie, watchful presence. Elon pushed the door open, the creak echoing through the empty space. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, filled with the scent of rotting wood and decay. They moved cautiously through the building, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The main room was empty except for a few broken chairs and fireplace filled with ash. But something about the space felt off, like it had been used recently. "Look," Lisa said, pointing to a corner. There, tucked beneath a pile of old newspapers, was a small box. Elon knelt and opened it, his heart pounding. Inside was a collection of personal items: a faded photograph of Claire, a few crumpled letters, and a worn bracelet he recognized immediately. "She was here," he whispered, his throat tight. Lisa crouched beside him, her hands trembling as she picked up one of the letters. "These look like drafts," she said, unfolding the paper carefully. The handwriting matched the diary, Claire's unmistakable scrawl. The letters were fragmented, incomplete, but they spoke of fear, longing, and regret. "Dad, if you find this, I hope you understand why I had to leave. I was scared, but I never stopped thinking about you." Elon stared at the words, his vision blurring. She wanted to reach out, to come back, but something had stopped her. Their search continued, leading them to the back of the lodge where a small, hidden door was wedged beneath the stairs. It opened with a groan, revealing a cramped crawlspace filled with old belongings. Among the scattered items was another notebook, this one more battered than the first. Elon opened it, his hands trembling. The entries inside were more detailed, chronicling Claire's days in hiding. "The man in the hat keeps following me. I don't know why he won't leave me alone. He says he wants to help, but I don't believe him. There's a group of people who meet near East Hollow. He says they're like me, but I don't trust him. I think they're dangerous. I miss Dad. I miss home, but I can't go back. Not yet." The final entry was chillingly abrupt. "He's coming again. I have to leave. If this is the last thing I write, I hope it reaches someone who cares." Elon closed the notebook, his grip tightening. "She was being hunted," he said, his voice thick with anger and despair. Lisa stared at him, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" Elon looked at the notebook, then at the room around them. "We keep looking. There has to be more." As they searched, Lisa found something hidden beneath the floorboards, a small, folded map with a single location marked in red. "What's this?" she asked, handing it to Elon. He unfolded it carefully, his heart pounding as he read the note scrawled at the bottom. "The commune. Trust no one." The weight of the map in Elon's hands felt heavier than it should have, as if the note scrawled at the bottom carried all the gravity of the years he had spent searching for Claire. The commune. Trust no one. The phrase looped in his mind, ominous and cryptic, and yet was the only direction he had. Lisa stood beside him, her expression pale as she stared at the map. The flickering beam of her flashlight highlighted her trembling hands, though she tried to mask her unease. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "It means she was afraid," Elon replied, his tone firm but distant. "Afraid of the people she was with. Afraid of being found." Lisa swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Do you really think this commune has something to do with her disappearance?" Elon nodded, tucking the map into his pocket. "If she marked it, it mattered to her. We have to find it." Lisa hesitated, shifting on her feet. "Elon, there's something I need to tell you." Her voice broke the stillness of the room, cutting through the tension like a jagged edge. Elon turned to her, his brow furrowing as he caught the hesitation in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with suspicion. Lisa looked away, her fingers twisting the edge of her jacket. "I didn't tell you everything back at the diner. About Claire." Elon's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I knew her. Not well, but I met her. It was years ago, before I started working at the diner. I was in a bad place, running from my own problems, and I ended up at this shelter downtown. That's where I met her." Elon's mind reeled. "You knew her?" Lisa nodded, her eyes filled with regret. "She helped me. I was scared, broke, didn't know what to do. She gave me money, food, even a place to stay for a few nights. She didn't have to. She didn't even know me, but she did it anyway. She was kind, but I could tell she was running from something too. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Elon demanded, his voice rising. Because I didn't know it was her, Lisa said, her voice cracking. Not until you showed me that photo and started asking questions. I didn't put it together until now. Elon stared at her, his thoughts racing. Her revelation opened a floodgate of questions, but it also deepened his sense of dread. Claire had been running, hiding, helping strangers like Lisa while trying to keep herself safe. Did she ever talk about where she was going or who she was running from? Elon asked, his tone urgent. Lisa shook her head. No, she was careful not to say too much, but there was one thing she mentioned. This man. She called him the man in the hat, said he kept showing up wherever she went, like he was tracking her. She didn't trust him, but she also didn't seem to think she could escape him. Elon's breath caught. The man in the hat, the same figure mentioned in Claire's diary. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? He repeated, his voice softer this time. Lisa's shoulders slumped. Because I didn't think I'd be dragged into all of this. And because I was scared. What if he's still out there? Elon placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. He might be, but if he is, that's all the more reason to keep going. Claire was brave enough to help you when she didn't have to. Now we owe it to her to find the truth. Lisa nodded slowly, her resolve returning. You're right. Let's find this commune. Elon's mind sharpened with purpose as he led the way back to the car. The map in his pocket was their next clue, and while it might lead to answers, it could also lead to danger. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't stop until he found Claire, and until he understood the truth about everything she had endured. The SUV rolled to stop at the edge of the clearing, its engine cutting out with a low growl that faded into the quiet expanse of the forest. Before them lay a cluster of cabins, weathered by time and nestled among the towering pines. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys, the only sign of life in this secluded corner of the world. Elon sat motionless for a moment, his hands still gripping the wheel as his eyes scanned the scene. Every nerve in his body felt taut, his breath shallow with anticipation. This was it. He could feel it. Beside him, Lisa fidgeted, the tension radiating off her in waves. This place is unsettling, she muttered, glancing at the cabins. Are you sure this is where we'll find her? Elon nodded once, his gaze never leaving the clearing. She marked it on the map, he said, his voice low and resolute. We're here for a reason. He stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at his face. Lisa followed, her boots crunching against the gravel as they approached the main cabin. A group of people moved about the clearing, men and women in simple clothes, their faces etched with lines that spoke of hard living and quiet determination. As Elon and Lisa neared, the group paused their activities, turning to regard the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. A tall man with a weathered face and graying hair stepped forward, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Elon's with the precision of someone used to sizing people up. You're far from home, the man said, his voice calm but laced with caution. What brings you here? Elon met his gaze, unflinching. I'm looking for my daughter, he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. Her name is Claire. She's been missing for 5 years. The man's expression didn't shift, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or hesitation. We don't get many visitors here, he said slowly. And we don't make a habit of giving out information about the people who come through. Elon stepped closer, his tone hardening. I don't care about your habits. My daughter is out there, and this is the closest I've been to finding her. If you know anything at all, I need you to tell me. The man's jaw tightened, his gaze shifting briefly to the others behind him before returning to Elon. After a long pause, he nodded. Come with me, he said. If she's here, we'll find her. The tension in Elon's chest tightened further as he followed the man toward the largest cabin, Lisa trailing behind him. Inside, the space was simple but warm, the faint scent of wood smoke lingering in the air. A long table dominated the room, its surface cluttered with books, maps, and handwritten notes. The man gestured for them to wait, disappearing through a door at the back of the cabin. The silence stretched, the minutes dragging like hours as Elon paced the room, his hands clenching and unclenching. Lisa stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the clearing outside. When the door creaked open again, Elon froze. A figure stepped into the room, hesitant and slow, as though unsure of her own steps. She was thinner than he remembered, her face sharper, her hair shorter and darker. But it was her. There was no mistaking it. Claire, Elon breathed, the name catching in his throat. Her eyes widened, the shock on her face quickly melting into something raw and vulnerable. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. Elon's heart nearly stopped. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, and before she could say another word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear again. Claire stiffened for a moment, then collapsed against him, her body racked with sobs. "I thought I'd never see you again," she choked out, her voice muffled against his chest. "I've been looking for you every day," Elon said, his own voice thick with emotion. Every single day. Lisa watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the reunion. Claire pulled back slightly, her hands gripping Elon's arms as though to anchor herself. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do." Elon cupped her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You don't have to explain right now," he said gently. "All that matters is that you're here. You're safe." Claire nodded, her tears still falling. "There's so much I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. "Things I didn't know how to say before. We'll talk about all of it," Elon promised. "But right now, I just need to know you're okay." Claire took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm okay now," she said softly. "But I wasn't before. There were people. They made it impossible to come back. I was scared, Dad. Scared they hurt you if I did." Elon's jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath his relief. "No one's going to hurt us. Not anymore." The words hung in the air, a vow as much as a comfort. Elon pulled her into his arms again, holding her close as the years of pain and uncertainty finally began to lift. The sun dipped low on the horizon as Elon guided the SUV onto the private drive leading to his home. The estate loomed ahead, a sprawling sanctuary of glass and steel surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens. Once a symbol of his ambition, the house now felt quieter, humbler in its purpose, a place where broken pieces could begin to mend. In the back seat, Claire pressed her forehead against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she took in the familiar sight. Her memories of this place were a tangled web, warmth, safety, but also the weight of expectations and the echoes of their final argument. She traced a fingertip along the edge of the glass, her heart both heavy and light. "It's still the same," she murmured, her voice distant. Elon glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his eyes softening. "It's always been waiting for you." Beside him, Lisa shifted in her seat, glancing back at Claire. She wanted to say something comforting, but held back, sensing that Claire needed the silence to absorb this moment. The SUV came to a stop in the wide, circular driveway. As the engine clicked off, the 3 of them sat still for a moment, the weight of their journey settling over them. Finally, Elon stepped out, walking around to open the passenger door for Lisa and then the back door for Claire. She hesitated before stepping out, her feet touching the ground as though it might shift beneath her. Her eyes roamed the grand facade of the house, the memories rushing back with each familiar detail. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the sleek black front door, the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. Elon stood beside her, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Take your time," he said quietly. Claire nodded, exhaling slowly. Her hand brushed the hem of her jacket as she took a step forward, then another, until she was at the front door. Her fingers hovered over the handle before pushing it open. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun streaming through the windows. The faint hum of the heating system was the only sound as Claire stepped into the living room. Everything was just as she remembered. The sleek leather furniture, the modern artwork on the walls, and the photographs lining the mantel. She walked over to the mantel, her gaze falling on one frame in particular, a picture of her and Elon at her 16th birthday party. They were side by side, smiling at the camera, the earrings he had given her catching the light. She picked up the frame, her thumb brushing over the glass. "You kept this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Elon stepped closer, his hands clasped in front of him. "I kept everything," he said simply. "Every photo, every card, every little thing that reminded me of you. It's all here." Claire's fingers tightened around the frame as tears welled in her eyes. "I thought you'd move on," she whispered. "I thought, maybe you stop looking." Elon's voice cracked as he replied, "Not for a single day, Claire. Not for 1 second." Her shoulders shook as the tears fell freely, and she turned to face him. "I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. For leaving. For not coming back sooner. For making you worry." Elon crossed the space between them, pulling her into his arms. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're here now, and that's all that matters." Lisa stood near the doorway, watching the reunion with tears in her own eyes. She wiped them away quickly, trying to compose herself, but the raw emotion of the moment was overwhelming. Claire pulled back slightly, her hands still gripping Elon's arms. "I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again," she admitted. "But I do now, with you." Elon smiled, his eyes glistening. "You're home, Claire. You'll always be safe here." As the days passed, the three of them began to settle into a new rhythm. Claire started therapy, taking her first steps toward healing. She shared pieces of her story when she felt ready, revealing the fear and loneliness that had kept her away for so long. Elon made changes too, scaling back his commitments and shifting his priorities. The relentless drive that had once defined him now took a back seat to something far more important: rebuilding the relationship with his daughter. Lisa found herself drawn deeper into their lives, her bond with both Elon and Claire growing stronger. One evening, Elon approached her with an unexpected offer. "You've been through so much, Lisa," he said, handing her a folder. Inside were enrollment papers for a college program. "You helped me find Claire. Now let me help you find your path." Lisa stared at the papers, her breath catching. "Elon, I don't know if I can." "You can," he interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "And you will. You've got so much ahead of you. Let me give you the chance you deserve." Tears filled Lisa's eyes as she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. One evening, as they all sat in the living room, the fire crackling in the hearth, Claire leaned her head against Elon's shoulder. She held Lisa's hand, the three of them bound by the strange, beautiful journey they had shared. "You never gave up on me," Claire said softly, her voice filled with awe and gratitude. "Never," Elon replied, his tone steady. "And I never will." Outside, the stars dotted, the night sky shining brighter than they had in years. Inside, laughter and hope filled the space that had once been silent. It was the beginning of something new, a life built on love, resilience, and the unshakable belief that even after the darkest nights, light always returns.